up, guys? Welcome to the Just Pearly Things YouTube channel, and welcome to The Sit Down, where I bring on different guests to talk about feminism, men and women's relationships, and other topics. Before I start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. Let's get this video to 2,000 likes. That's the most important metric that YouTube uses to push out these streams. Also, get yourself a Women Shouldn't Vote t-shirt today. You know, you guys know my opinion. The breakdown of the family everything is all because women got the right to vote. Get yourself a t-shirt. All the women will come up to you and say how awesome you are. So welcome to the show, guys. Can you give the audience a little background? I'm starting with you, Paul.
Yeah, I'm Paul Elam. My website is paulelam.com. I've been involved in working around men and men's issues for nearly 40 years now. My YouTube channel is anearformen.com. And you can also find me at paulelam.com/XY crew for our men's groups that deal with these very topics every day of the week.
Okay, so I'm a divorced mother of 3, remarried. All my children are adults now and gainfully employed and responsible citizens. I don't even know how that happened. But yeah, no, I've been involved in men's rights and anti-feminism since about 2010, when I started discussing the issues online. And what led me to be interested in them was that I was going through my divorce at that time. And you know how when you divorce, you have this extremely long, detailed list, right down to every last little thing of what they did wrong. But if you don't want to have something like that happen again, you actually have to try and figure out what you did wrong. And because it's never only just one person screwing up and ruining a marriage. So I was looking for answers, and I stumbled across a men's website called The Spearhead, and I started participating in the comment section there, and it was brutal. It was absolutely brutal, but fair, but totally fair. And I started reading all of these articles about things like domestic violence and sexual assault and false allegations and divorce law and alimony and child support laws and all kinds of things like that. And I thought, well, this is not the world I want my sons to grow up in. And it's definitely not even the world that I want my daughter to grow up in, because if you completely destroy the trust that men have for women, how can your daughter be able to go out and form a relationship with someone who's trustworthy? If he's pretending to trust her not to screw him over, then it's because he's planning to screw her over, right? So I was just like, no, this is not a good way to form families and have a functioning society. And so I just started talking about it. And, there was an aspect of someone is wrong on the internet well.
It's funny when
I can't leave people to say stupid things and then just walk away with nobody pushing back on them. So,
well, it's funny when you first get into the red pill space as a chick, because I think we're just so used to being pandered to 24/7 that you hear it, you're like, oh wow, this is what guys think. And it's kind of like a shock at first, but then I don't know how it was for you, but for me, I was like, oh, this is actually helpful to know. I was like, this is actually useful information.
I think there's 2 different kinds of women out there that get into the red pill space. And there are those who look at the pushback from men and say, well, given what they're living with and working with every day, this is understandable. It's not pleasant, it's not pretty, but I get it. This is the way they feel. And there's lots of women that get into the red pill space also that get some of that pushback, and all of a sudden we're evil and we're everything feminists have always said we were. So I like those guys out there given the pushback for the reason that it really gets the non-hackers out of the way, so that women who really want to speak to these issues can.
It's nice to have them. They're a very, very, very effective vetting committee, basically. If you're real, you'll stick around. And, I saw a couple of women who were totally on board with the guys at the Spearhead until, one of them said something particularly insulting about women, and or maybe
Oh.
was rude to them, and then they pulled their woman card and said, well, you can't be rude to me, I'm a woman, and you don't treat women like that. And they were like, yeah, you can go fuck off now. And they would get booted out. And it's like, no, you can't. These guys are being honest about how they feel, and they are often being brutally honest, because that's the only way anybody's ever going to care, is if this guy is so shockingly honest that it snaps you out of your malaise, and you actually have to pay attention to him. It's like the difference between someone, a man standing on the sidewalk yelling at people. Well, you got to pay attention to that guy, as opposed to a man lying on the sidewalk, under a pile of newspapers, slowly dying.
Yeah. Well, and
then people just walk past.
I used to, when I first started watching the stuff, I would say oh, why do they say it like that? And then I realized, I'm like, oh, it's just how guys talk. But we're so used to being pandered to that we're just not used to the bluntness of it. But I think it's good. I feel like it's overall it's a good thing, because then you kind of understand how guys think around you a little bit better.
Yeah.
And keep in mind too that guys get pushback on this. I practice a lot of that bluntness in the work I do, and I can tell you there's no shortage of guys out there pushing back on me, saying I need to be Warren Farrell instead of Paul Elam. That's just sort of part of the vetting process for men, I think.
Yeah, no, and I have a real hard time with, when you look at Warren Farrell, I imagine two parents, right? So you have the one parent who calmly and quietly explains to the child, why you're having a timeout, because and why you need to clean your room, or why you need to, go to school be on time, and why you need to do things, and be very reasonable and very calm and very quiet. And then every once in a while you need a parent who's just going to put his foot down, right, and say, no, this far, no further, smarten up, or you're going to get your ass tanned. And I mean, you cannot have a men's movement populated only by Warren Farrells. You need the tip of the spear. You need the spearhead of people who are rude and in your face and shocking and blunt and brutally honest, right? To basically soften up the audience to be willing to even listen to and entertain the positions of the Warren Farrells out there. Because otherwise, Warren Farrell is just never going to get anywhere.
Yeah, they say I'm really mean, so.
Oh, they all say I'm really mean too, so.
You guys are cupcakes.
Oh, Sachi Cool. Oh, I don't know if you know her, Sachi Cool. She's a Canadian journalist, but she was working for BuzzFeed, and she put me on a Netflix special, and I sat down for 90 minutes with her, and then about 40 minutes into the interview, she says, well, you called me a cunt. And I was like, did I? And she's like,
was she?
Yeah, 6 times. And I'm like, are you? And she says, are you denying it? And I'm like, no, it sounds like something I'd say, I just don't recall. I've called a lot of people cunts. And she's like,
was she
well,
a cunt?
You did.
And then my question.
And then I'm like, okay. And then she says, well, do you still think I'm a cunt? And I'm like, yeah, kinda, and I burst out laughing, right? I wish I had been more on the ball. I would have looked at my imaginary watch and said, well, we've been here for 40 minutes and you haven't given me a reason to change my mind. So, and she just sat through the whole thing looking like I just forced her to eat bird poop. It was great.
My question today, I'm curious. So what is you guys' opinion of feminism as a whole?
It has never not been rotten.
Okay.
I don't know if I can add anything to that. It's been a hate movement from its inception, starting with Seneca Falls all the way up to today. It is populated by a lot of women who have big time issues with men, and they express it politically through feminism.
I'd say going back further than that, going back all the way to Mary Wollstonecraft.
Yeah.
That she had, if you actually read about her life, she was deeply disturbed, probably borderline personality disorder or bipolar or something like that. Paranoid. She hated men. She hated her father. And she never got married. She had a child out of wedlock. She tried to kill herself when she found that, okay, at this point, it's difficult to be a single mother. So I'm going to try and coerce the man who impregnated me into marrying me. And he wouldn't do it because she was crazy. And so then she tried to kill herself with this 6-year-old or 9-year-old girl daughter who was depending on her. And because this guy said, no, I don't want to be married to you. And I'm guessing he was paying her some sort of support. But it's like, I'm looking at that. That was the proto-feminist that gave birth to what occurred in Seneca Falls 75 years later. And that, I mean, when you look at that document, the Declaration of Sentiments, and you read that one line, the history of mankind is a history of repeated usurpations and oppressions by man against woman, having indirect object, the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her, right? That is what they were saying. That was their description of the world as it stood in 1850. And then they just go from there and they make this list of all of the ways in which men have wronged women. And of course, none of the ways in which men have done right by women, none of the sort of the trade-offs that were made in terms of, yes, men have custody of the children by default. I mean, like, there are ways of getting around that, but fathers have custody of their children by default. But that's because fathers paid for their children. They were the sole people legally responsible for supporting those children. So they got them because they paid for them, but it doesn't say anything about that. And you look at all of the ways that they began to dismantle all of those norms, right? Well, men, they switched. They didn't say, ooh, let's go to equal shared custody on the part of mothers and fathers. No, it was custody to the mother, tender years doctrine. But no reason to touch that whole child support and alimony thing, and the father being the sole provider for all the necessaries of his children and the head of their household, which is now the mother, right? Oh, no reason to look at that. No reason to think about that, right? So, or change any of that. So they really pulled one over on society, and every single thing that they did with coverture was they took away all of the handicaps on women, all of the restrictions on women, all of the limitations on women, and handed them everything they wanted, and then kept all of the obligation and responsibility and culpability and all of those things on men.
Well, I mean, all of that is factually correct.
And most of this shit happened before women got the vote, just so you know.
It's important to keep all this in mind, because what you'll hear most common, even from alleged conservatives today, is that feminism was a movement with all the right ideas that somehow took a turn south and went in the wrong direction at some point, maybe in the late 1960s, early 70s, something like that. Of course, that's a fallacy. Feminism was rotten from the beginning. I know that Karen's right, it predates Seneca Falls, but in Seneca Falls even, men were invited to attend that convention and sit in the back with their mouths shut from the very beginning. That was the rules that the women put forth at Seneca Falls. It's never been an inclusive movement that was about any kind of justice or anything of that sort. It was always about women getting all the power they could and exercising it against men. And this is exactly what we see playing out in the social landscape today, and politically and legally across the board. Feminism has poisoned our society in many ways. But I think it's also really important not to forget that feminism is one side of a coin. Gynocentrism as a whole tells a more complete picture, because you've got people like our friends at the Daily Wire and other places who are saying they're anti-feminist and then turning around and just parroting all sorts of adulation and deference to women and painting women as victims, using all the same language that feminism uses, just from a slightly different angle. And when you object to that, they'll say you're like the feminist. It's an interesting dynamic.
But Paul,
that's the
you're
way
not
it plays
not a real man if you don't get married.
Absolutely. That meme, unfortunately, the political right in, I think, North America, Karen, is there any more political right in Canada that exists anymore?
Yes.
Okay, good. It's there. But what you get from these guys is that they will not talk about changing family law or fixing family law. They will talk about men needing to get married. But the moment you talk about family, they need to step up and man up and take the hit or whatever, step up to the plate as fathers, even if they catch fastballs between the eyes. They need to step up and do that. And at the same time, they're saying that they're anti-feminist. It's a strange mix.
Well, and
Yeah.
These guys.
I think it's interesting too to note that I think, wasn't it Ronald Reagan who basically passed no-fault divorce in the
In
United
California,
States?
the first governor to do that.
Yeah, and it's like, well, okay, yeah, I can understand having no-fault divorce, right? Like, you don't have to prove that he beat you. You don't have to prove that he raped you. You don't have to prove that he was abusive or abandoned the family. You don't have to prove any of that. You just have irreconcilable differences, and you can divorce him, and you can do that unilaterally without having to prove fault. Okay, so you walk away with your share, a fair share of the marital assets that you both accumulated during the marriage, and that's it. That's it, right? And you share custody of your kids, because if it's no fault, then you're basically saying he's not at fault either, right? Mm-hmm. So you walk away. You don't have to take him out for the rest of his life. There's like the whole lifetime alimony thing. It's Republicans who often keep that going. So it's infuriating to me where you have this, Republicans in bed with feminists, right?
For being married,
super awesome bedfellows there. But like Rick Scott in Florida, he twice vetoed a bill that would get rid of lifetime alimony, and at the behest of the National Organization for Women. That's what he did, and it's like, because he thinks that, a man's place is to be supporting women. And you can think that all you want, right? And I don't have any problem with that, right? Like, I live in a marriage right now where my man financially supports the whole household, and I take care of him and, the home as ineptly as often that is, but I look after all of those things. I take care of paying the bills. I take care of all the domestic stuff. I take care of all the cooking, and he needs a lot of cooking and all of those things. I don't have a problem with even organizing society around those principles. You just can't have a society that's organized around those principles where you pretend that they don't exist and you make laws that don't enforce those principles. You make laws that actually counteract those principles. So it's like, basically we have this thing where it's like a woman can divorce a man in Florida for any reason or no reason at all and walk away, and he has to pay her for the rest of his life, and he never gets to retire. His retirement is the day that he pulls out a gun and does that, right? And so I'm just looking at it and I'm thinking, if you want, as a traditionalist Republican, right, who believes in gender roles and who believes in, this gender distribution of labor, and who believes in, marriage, and who believes in all of those, then pick that and make laws that reinforce that, right? Don't pick that, right, in terms of what you're willing to say socially, and then just do a whole bunch of stuff that completely contradicts it and makes it impossible to actually establish in real life. So.
But here's the problem that we keep facing with conservatives all the time, is that they'll insist that men step up and volunteer for the abuse, but they will never speak about family courts.
Yeah.
Because they do not have the spines to stand up to women.
Right.
They will not put themselves in a role of seeing in competition or conflict with women. So all they're left with is, you need to get married no matter what, no matter how bad the deal is, no matter how corrupt the courts are, no matter how lopsided the laws are. You need to step up and do this. And by the way, when you say, we'll fix the courts first, they go dead silent.
Yeah.
It's absolutely the hypocrisy and the lack of spine in conservatives over this matter is just staggering.
Yeah, well, it's so crazy, because I like, when I first got into the red pill space, I didn't really understand people's like problem with marriage. I was like, what's the problem? My parents are married. And then I started I started researching it, and I started working on my divorce documentary. And I had this like realization. I'm like, a lot of guys would have been better off if they never got married or had kids, because I realized, I'm like, the women will turn the kids against the dad anyways. And and God knows who the mom, the baby mother, stepmom, whatever, brings, like, what dad what male she
Or
brings
parade of uncles.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. And so I'm like, no, because some of the guys, it's like really sad when you talk to them. They're like, they're so like, there's just nothing like a guy who can't see his kids. Like, it's just like the most devastating thing where he'll be like a mile away from them and he can't see them and he feels so powerless from this court system. I'm like, fuck, if I was a guy, I don't know if I'd sign up for this, even if it was just
No.
like, because they'll always try to downplay the stats. Like, they'll try to, like, because I would argue that
You just didn't meet the right woman.
yeah, they'll be like, find a girl that prays. I'm like, have you seen the bitches that pray nowadays? Like, I'm not trying to be rude, but like, I mean, I've seen Kate, like, I just got to the point where I couldn't find a right woman that I hadn't seen fuck over a guy. I'm like, I found the Muslim girl, I found the Eastern Europeans that are supposed to be better. I found like the Russian
the
chick
Asian
came over here.
girls.
Yeah, no, it's all of them. I'm like, it's just us. Like, and so, it just kind of made me realize that shit, like if I was a guy, I wouldn't sign up. The only solution, if they really want to bring families together, is to switch the courts, because it's like, this is 2 generations of men at least that have been screwed over by this court system. So, guys are logical. They kind of weigh the pros and cons. They're like, I can't even get 2 kids out of this anymore. They're like, and I have to risk it all for
well,
1.5.
yeah, but they'll hate your guts by the time they're 20.
Yeah, no, and why would you do it when you've got, casual sex? And I tell my boys, right, if you're going to engage in that, you bring your own condoms. You don't use the ones she has, right? You bring your own condoms, you use them, you take them into the bathroom afterwards, you rinse them out in the hottest water that comes out of the tap, and then you throw them in the trash. Don't flush them down the toilet because that's disgusting, and somebody has to scrape all that stuff off of the intake valves at the water treatment center. So, don't make it hard for other men is basically what I'm saying. But yeah, you need to protect yourself. And like my sister, when I started making my videos, my older sister, she's 6 years older than me. She said she had the talk with her daughter, who was, 13 or something at the time, about, the talk about boys and, staying on the straight and narrow and not giving into temptation and not letting anybody talk you into doing anything you shouldn't be doing and all of that stuff. Right. And she says, and then you started making videos and I started realizing I have to have that talk with my boys too. And so she's got, her boys are sandwiched in between 2 daughters. And so she gave them the talk about watching out for users, watching out for women who are going to lie, expect them to lie when they say they're on birth control, expect them to be lying, and predict that, they will sperm jack you if they can, because, and maybe only 1 in 1,000 women will do this, but that 1 in 1,000 means $150,000, 26-year amortized baby mortgage.
And I think that speaks to a bigger issue too than just marriage. I mean, what we're talking about here is the fundamental lack of trust that we can have, that men can have in women nowadays, because the potential damage isn't limited to marriage. I mean, there's paternity fraud, all kinds of things that go on all the time between women and men that this society won't talk about. But it fundamentally boils down to that relationships with men who are unconscious about going about them are a very dangerous thing to get involved in. And they can be very dangerous even if you are conscious about what's going on.
And the hypocritical thing too is that, when they talk about paternity fraud and okay, so, she had the milkman's kids, but, he was their dad and he raised them as his own. And he didn't even know they weren't his until, he found out when one of the kids needed a kidney or something like that. And, so, but I mean, it shouldn't matter. DNA shouldn't matter. And I'm looking at these 2 women in France about 10 years ago, whose babies were switched at the hospital. And they got like 2.5 million euros in compensation for that, because they discovered it when their daughters were 15. That, and they loved their daughters, but it mattered. The DNA mattered to them. Each of them went home with a daughter. DNA shouldn't matter. Yeah. Well, apparently it matters to women.
So what is gynocentrism? I'm starting to learn, like, is that just like putting women on a pedestal, essentially?
That's one definition. I think it's a long-standing, for about the past 1,000 years, since the what am I looking for? The advent of romantic chivalry blended with our natural biological predispositions. But it basically boils down to women matter, men don't. Everything about women matters. Their health matters more. It's why we have a department on women's health in the government and nothing for men. It's why the courts are biased. It's why the relationship rules are rigged to disadvantage men from the beginning. We are supposed to be like seals clapping our flippers together for a piece of fish and balancing a beach ball on our nose in order to win the favor of women. I mean, there's a million different ways that gynocentrism is expressed, but I think that really does sum it up. It's just about women being elevated in importance over men in all matters.
I think when you look, because I look at it less from a sociological or historical context and more from an evolutionary biological context. And I think that when it comes to patriarchy and gynocentrism are effectively fed by the same core impulses that are determined by our wetware, right? So this is our operating system. It's not the software it's not the apps that we install afterwards, culture and stuff like that. The apps can be very bad. And I think that modern gynocentrism is very much a set of really toxic apps. But this is a fundamental operating system. It's what got us through the Pleistocene, the mass extinction during the Pleistocene, which is patriarchy is basically the recognition of paternity and gender roles, right? Gender division of labor. In terms of patriarchy is the ring of soldiers and hunters that surrounds the village, and gynocentrism is the women who are kept safe within that village to get down to their job of producing more people, right? Of producing offspring. So when you look at it in that way, you can see it as something that is actually it's evolutionarily, it makes sense. It's why 6 other hominid species went extinct during the Pleistocene. The Neanderthals being the most famous, they didn't have a gendered division of labor. Men, women, and children all engaged in big game hunting, and their skeletons have the fractures to prove it, right? Female, male, and child. So you're looking at, once they came across, and they didn't have any domestic arts at all other than what they borrowed from us. So basically what you're looking at is something that is actually really, really well established to promote survival, to promote community cohesion, right? This gendered division of labor, that the gender roles for men and women. Men protect humans, women produce humans, right? And that's just how it works. And it worked really well. Then you got into all of these stages where, well, we can give women a little bit more freedom. Oh, well, we can give women a little bit more power. Oh, we can give women a little bit more choice. We can give women the ability to say no when their husband says duck or hide. But we're going to still hold him responsible if she takes an arrow to the chest, right? He's still the one to blame because he couldn't protect her, right? Even though she didn't have to obey him. And so, I mean, you're looking at all of these corruptions of these very deeply ingrained impulses that we have, that we're born with, that are very hard to purge. This is why it's taken 150 years or more for men to actually start defending themselves against feminism and against this campaign of anti-male hate, is because they have it's counter to their natural impulses, which are to protect and provide for women, because that's the best way to protect and provide for their offspring, right? Their own offspring and their communities. So it's like you look at it and it's just this massive corrupt hijacking of our natural impulses that are, in my opinion, pragmatic and morally neutral. And we've just changed them and changed them and changed them and changed them, and always to ease up the rules for women. And then somebody has to pick up that slack, so the rules get more harsh on men. And like back in the day, when you had, if a woman was raped, it was at least against the law, right? And it was against the law because she might end up with a baby, right? That's basically the reason it was against the law. She might end up with a baby that would be born, that would disadvantage her, and it would be disadvantaged, and all of that because no father, around to support them and all of that stuff, right? It's not even just not a crime to lie about birth control. It's written into Canadian law that a woman who sabotages or lies about birth control cannot be prosecuted for sexual assault. And that was written into a decision finding a man who poked holes in the condoms guilty of sexual assault.
I'd like to back up a little bit and respectfully push back on some of that. I don't agree with the biodeterminism in this at all. Social customs around men and women have evolved and changed for centuries. It's hard for me to imagine a significant number of men, which we're starting to see nowadays, even having the opportunity to go red pill if this is so biologically determined. I don't get
think
that.
It's just
and I don't think it serves us as a model because it takes choice out of the hands of men. I mean, factually, I think it's incorrect because we just have so much social history around gynocentrism and its evolution in socially with human beings. That, I mean, predating romantic chivalry, courtly love, people didn't even get married for love. They got married for practicality. And that
for
was all there
economic
was
reasons.
to it. Yeah. But in the end, if a guy ends up in a place where he understands some model, some understanding of gynocentrism, and can use that model or that knowledge to protect himself, I think he's in good shape. But I prefer a little bit more personal control over my destiny than biology would allow me.
Oh yeah, no, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that this is something that's written in stone. I'm saying that people have to have a meta awareness of what's going on in order to curtail their own impulses and their own even I have a problem. You remember the Egyptian woman in the blue bra? Remember that video?
Yep.
Even I was horrified by that. And I had to watch it a second time to see what was going on with the men around and how they were getting much more brutally beaten. And lots of MRAs left comments under that video where I talked about it. And they said they didn't even realize that the men who were getting beaten in the same frame, right, were completely oblivious to those men, and then they had to go back and watch and see how much more brutally those men were being treated by Egyptian police than that one woman, right? And they had to go back and watch because they were like, oh no, she was like absolutely brutally stomped, when in reality the moment her burqa fell open and they realized, oh, there is actually a woman under here, because a lot of men in the Middle East will put on a burqa to make trouble because women are supposedly off limits for state violence, that they realized that the moment her burqa fell open and it was clear that she was a woman, one of the cops pushed, another cop was like in the process of jumping and going to kick her, and he pushed her away, pushed that cop away.
Wait, so I have a question. So are you saying, Paul, you're saying you don't think it's biological gynocentrism?
I think there's biological elements to it, absolutely. Yeah. I don't think we can deny that, but I think we also, to just identify it as a biological mechanism alone, I think misses the point.
Okay.
You can't capitulate to it. I mean, like, it is biological in the sense that women want what they want when they want it and as much as they can get. Like, yes, social norms between men and women have changed through the centuries and all of that, right? But what's always the core pattern, right? Men make the environment safe, and then women decide they want to go outside, and then they demand their men let them go outside. They demand their men let them have freedom. So the men say okay, and then the women demand more and more freedom and more autonomy and more agency and more ability to make their own decisions and not have to be obedient or not have to like capitulate to any kind of restrictions. And then boom,
yeah, now you
collapses.
can be a fat whore and still be a wife.
And then we're back to subsistence living, where women actually have to be obedient to their husbands because they actually really depend on their husbands, and things aren't safe and nothing's plentiful and everybody's starving. And
this is why Cato the Elder said 2,000 years ago, if you make women your equals, they'll become your masters.
That's right.
Right. So you said before 1,000 years ago there was no romantic love.
I'm saying the
I'm
whole
sure there was
idea.
romantic love.
I mean, there was infatuation. I think that always has it. The release of oxytocin, chemical infatuation, bonding between human beings was always there, but it was regarded as a form of insanity, generally socially, and people saw no reason. The idea of getting married based on that infatuation was considered absolute insanity. It just
Yeah,
didn't
your parents would be so disappointed.
Absolutely. But then a woman, Eleanor of Aquitaine, her daughter Marie, commissioned troubadours, spread the word of romantic love and its elevation above all other forms of love, and it caught on. And it has come to be our standard ever since.
Yeah, no, and what I find interesting about that too is that it's elevated above all other forms of love, including the love of God, which, you know,
And
even
love
as
of King.
even as an atheist, right? I can say, you know, for the time, that was a pretty ballsy statement. And really, I can't even imagine how she wasn't like strung up on a rack. I mean, weren't they still burning witches and stuff at that
because
point?
William, her father, I believe her father or grandfather, was, I think, the world's first simp, carrying an image of his mistress on his shield into battle, and he was what inspired them. They grew up watching him simp for all the women in his court, and they turned it into a cottage industry that spread throughout the world.
And is that where, because I had this thought wondering if proposals were almost gynocentric because, or like, I was thinking more like feminist because the guy's like going below the woman. And I never thought about it. It's like kind of when
he's on his knee.
Yeah, I was like,
he's on his knees begging her to be his economic dependent for the rest of his life. And he's purchasing her with a ring that cost him 3 months' salary.
Well, and even I had a thought, I started Googling the average price of a wedding, and I was thinking about how the price of weddings has gone up, but the value of brides is like so low. Because I had this thought where, because I got into the red pill and they're like, modern women bring nothing. And I'm like, what do you mean we bring nothing? And then I started going through the stats and I was like, oh shit, we've like, as a group, 1 out of 3 of us has had an abortion. 1 out of 3 has an STD. I'm like, we have like 1 point something kids. I'm like, God damn, this is not good.
With a shout out to Erin Clary, there's lots of women who want to get married and have families. There's very few who want to be wives and mothers.
Yeah,
that was really the thing, you know, like it wasn't hard for me to find my first husband. You know, find a man who was willing to actually go into a marriage, a very traditional marriage, right? With stay-at-home mom, at least in as much as possible financially. And even when I went back to work, our kids never went to daycare. They were never with a babysitter. I just took jobs that were on opposite shifts from my husband, and he stayed home. One of us was home with them. And, and, you know, I did a whole bunch of really traditional things around the house. You know, I cooked from scratch. I bought cloth diapers that you have to fold and pin. You know, I rescued and refurbished furniture. I did everything I possibly could to squeeze every bit of value out of every single penny so that I could afford to stay home. And, but you know, it's very, very difficult, I think, to find a woman these days who would be willing to not just do all of those things domestically, including being the handyman around the house and things like that, plunging your own toilet and all of those things. Because this is what, you know, I was basically a farm wife living in a small town. But it's hard to find a woman like that, and it's hard to find a woman who's willing to actually commit to that lifestyle, right? Like, so to find one you can't even find a woman who can cook these days half the time, right? You know, they know how to microwave a lean cuisine. That's about it. And like and one who's willing to commit long term, right? Like long term, at least until the kids are basically grown. And next to impossible to find somebody who actually wants to do those things. It was not hard for me to find a man who wanted to live that way.
Yeah,
It
that's what
was hard for him to
I
find a
found
woman.
But
too. Go ahead.
there's been a positive in that, though, in that, in my household, I'm in a relationship of 21 years now, very happily connected in that way. But I am the cook in the house because I don't want to eat inferior food.
That's what my oldest says. He says he's the cook because he and my daughter live together. They share a duplex, and they're like 15 months apart. Like they're just like joined at the hip, kind of. And but yeah, he does all the cooking because he wouldn't eat the swill that Rachel makes. So,
but you know something, I gotta say, and I hope women someday wake up to this. If you can be replaced by somebody who can push a broom and use a skillet, maybe you're not bringing enough to a relationship.
Yeah. No, if he can pay $200-$300 a week to have somebody come in and do those services, including the dick sucking, once a week, then like, why are you here? Right? You have to actually bring some kind of, and sex is part of that, of course, because no man gets married just praying that he'll never have sex again.
Yeah, well, that was like a red pill too. I was like, are these wives not sleeping with their husbands? I was like, what? It's I didn't realize how common it was. Like, I started interviewing these guys in divorce, and it was always like the same story. It was like, it was like an accidental pregnancy early on. Then he marries her, and then she just stopped sleeping with him after the kids. I was like, what the hell?
She'll stop sleeping with him. He'll go sexless for 3 years, and then she'll wig out because she finds out he's looking at porn.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the insane thing. Yeah, no, this madam in Australia, she wrote a piece in, I think it was the Sydney Morning Herald or something like that, where she basically was saying, wives, be better, right? Because she says, she wrote that half of her escorts, right, when they go on a date, there's not even any sex. They lie in bed with the guy and cuddle, and he tells them all of his heart's deepest secrets across the pillow because he can't safely disclose those things to his wife. He does not feel safe to do that. And I'm like, Jesus Christ. So these guys are paying like $200 an hour for
somebody to talk to.
Pillow therapy.
Oh my gosh. Do you know what I started asking guys? I'd be like, okay, if you're on a first date and a girl just said to you, I don't know anything, I know nothing, but I'm willing to learn, would you go on another date with her? They're all like, yeah, that sounds amazing. I'm like, oh no.
I would shit test her a lot more than that.
Yeah, well, but you'd go on a
no, but I was just thinking like, wow, that's like the bar is so low. They're like, I can teach her. She listens. That's it.
Well, I tell you what, that's more than a lot of guys get.
Yeah. Do you think feminism was responsible for the breakdown of relationships today, or do you think it started before that?
I think it's a synergism of sort of the modern day simp and feminism. I mean, it's really easy to point the finger at feminism. It's such a corrupt ideology practiced by very corrupt, selfish, narcissistic, often personality disordered people. So it's an easy target, and it's certainly deserving of the criticism that it gets. But I think that the social gynocentrism that we practice today, the way men just capitulate to totally disrespecting themselves, life on their knees, groveling before women, that is a really big problem. I would argue worse than feminism.
Wait, so just quick, can I have a couple examples of that?
Well, I think that I'll give you a short story as an example. I was furniture shopping with my partner a few years back, and we were picking out a new sofa for the living room. And the salesman happened to be an African-American man, I'd say in his mid-40s, had a crucifix on his lapel, nice Armani suit, very sharp dressed guy. And he's showing us around, and 3 or 4 times he made reference saying, we all know who's making the decision here, don't we?
Yeah.
His implication was that I had no voice in this purchase that I was about to make, that I had to defer to her. And I finally turned to him and said, you know what? That's not how it works here.
Yeah.
And he was shocked. He was absolutely stunned that I said something like that. That's one of 10 million examples. Man, if you want to see simping, go on Twitter.
Yeah.
You'll see it everywhere.
And
guys running to the rescue of the most vicious, nasty hoes you can possibly imagine. Guys rushing in to defend her honor and to defend all women's honor.
Paul, but
as
she
though
prays.
That's something you can actually do.
But
it's
she
absolutely
prays.
disgusting. It's
She
the most
prays.
disgusting. To me, these guys are worse than men who actually do abuse women, and they're much more common. Much more common.
You think they're worse than men that abuse women?
Yes, I do. I think they do more damage
Yeah.
in what they role model to young men, to boys, and to girls in terms of what their expectations are of men. They set future men up to have to emulate that behavior in order to stay in good social graces.
Yeah.
Well, I think
terrible.
that I think because the reason it's more dangerous, the reason it's more insidious is because it is considered the socially appropriate way for men to behave. Everybody is horrified when a man strikes a woman, when a man hits a woman. Everybody is. Like, there's no normalizing that. You go back 100, 200, 400, 500 years. Nobody liked it when that happened, right? Nobody at all, not even the Catholic Church in the 1450s, right? They did not like spousal abuse. They did not like any man raising a hand to any woman. It was just not something that was considered socially acceptable. People would turn and look away. They would pretend not to see it. But they had to turn and look away from it. They weren't saying, yeah, you tell her how it is. Punch her again. They weren't doing that. Right?
But now they'll freak out if you disagree with a woman.
Yeah.
Yelling is abuse now, I guess. That's what Crowder was just abusing his wife,
Or the silent treatment is also spousal abuse by men against women.
Gaslighting. I learned this. I'm
refusing to talk to her.
Yes. Oh, isn't that stonewalling? Isn't that what they say? These psychologists make up these crazy terms. I'm like, what the hell?
That sounds like as good a term as any. I haven't heard stonewalling, but I don't doubt that they're using it because you can take any normal form of behavior in men and it will be called abusive, and the opposite of that behavior will be called abusive too. So it really doesn't matter.
Well, and it's interesting. I think the first time we talked, I was like, wow, this guy really hates simp. But it's weird. It's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. Where you're like, shit, they're just lying. Like women, it's like, okay, we're just such idiots. I mean, not all of us, but a lot. We just believe damn near anything. It's so crazy. But it's like the guys, they know. So I'm like, why are you lying? They'll come on my show and say they like women that have slept around. They'll come on the show and say there's nothing wrong with their 37-year-old sister who's never dated anybody. And I'm just like, that's not true. Why? It's just once you see it, you just can't. God, I'm like, do I hate
Look
simps?
at all the people that say women can do anything men can do, which is patently untrue. It's so untrue that it's laughable, laughably untrue. And the whole of society will nod their heads like bobbleheads.
Oh, yeah, no. When Barack Obama said a woman can do anything a man can do, and better, and in heels, and everybody's like, oh yeah. And I'm just like, are you freaking kidding me? Get up there in that cherry picker and fix that power pole, bitch.
Well, and I played sports, so I'm like, you realize how much stronger dudes are? I'm like top 1% if you look at how tall I am. Strength, it's probably similar. I could deadlift 300 pounds. That's a lot for a chick. But for a chick, do you know what I mean? Even an average guy can outbench me. You know what I mean? It's not, and it's I've trained 16 years to outbench or out deadlift I don't know, a couple guys maybe who don't train and are obese.
No, and it's you're looking at the Canadian Olympic women's hockey team. they spar with not even midget AAA, but basically the up to 15-year-old category,
Well,
right?
and
Midget
all these
AAA is
women
15 to
do.
18. And they practice with them and they routinely lose. The Australian women's soccer team, they train against 15 and under boys teams, and they routinely lose.
Well, and all they do is
And
complain. They whine about the pay when I'm like, you're lucky to even have a league. Like,
yeah.
like I was
They,
like,
they complain about the pay that they're actually getting by siphoning off of men's sports, which is
Yeah.
exactly what happens.
I literally said, I was like, if I was the guys, I would just cut it, because I was like, all we do is complain and bitch about the pay. I'm like, I would just cut it. I would just cut the whole league. You want to bitch about it? And I loved sports, but I'm like, no one's watching it.
Yeah, well, and the idea that you're going to get male fans of, say, the NBA, right, of basketball, to watch women's basketball is
Laughable.
I mean, maybe there will be some,
No.
but not a lot. And women just generally aren't sports fans in particular, right? Like I went to a hockey game once. We don't normally go to, even though my husband was a hockey player and he really likes the sport. We don't go to hockey games, but it was part of a Christmas party or something like that his employers bought everybody hockey tickets, and we went there and we were seated next to these two couples, and the guys were like totally into the game, and the two women with their probably $200 a piece seats just sat there and gossiped the whole time. They didn't even notice when someone scored.
My dad's totally done that with me, where he brings me to like really good like seats for like a game or whatever. I don't care. And I played sports and I don't even like watching it. And I played. I'm like talking to my sister.
The one thing all those women who come to high dollar sporting events and gossip through the whole thing all have in common is that they did not pay for those tickets.
Oh yeah. No, I go with my dad.
Well, I mean, like I was on my feet cheering and stuff because, hey, this is my hometown. It's my hometown team, Edmonton Oilers, and they were playing real good against the Vancouver Canucks, and I hated the fucking Vancouver Canucks. And because they betrayed me, but with their stupid goalie, Dan Cloutier, curse you. But yeah, no, I actually had to stop watching hockey for about 10 years because of that guy back when I was living in British Columbia. But yeah, no, it's like you have a very small pool of women who are actually interested in sports in terms of buying tickets. Like in terms of buying tickets, I'm not interested. And then in terms of actually watching the games and being interested in sports in general, you've got very, very low numbers of women who are likely to. They literally somebody literally went out on the street and offered somebody a free ticket to a WNBA game or a $1 bill, and the dude took the $1 bill.
You know what's so crazy?
And he just went around between people.
I played, I think maybe.
And they all took the $1 bill.
You know what's so funny? I'm 26, I'm about 27. I think I started playing basketball when I was like 6 or 7. I've played for 20 years. I would pick the $100 bill.
Well, it was a $1 bill or something. It was way less value than the ticket. I think the ticket was only worth $20.
I'm curious, how has social media changed relationships between men and women? Because when social media came to the scene, I was pretty young. So I think I got my first like Facebook when I was in 8th grade. So I was like 12 maybe. So it like, as far as I really remember, social media has just always been there. But I'm curious from your point of view, like how has it changed?
I think it's changed it for the better.
Really?
I think we're seeing the beginnings of changes for the better. The thing that is so great about social media is that the alternative narrative to this romantic model, this gynocentric bullshit that's been running the world, is that stuff would never be expressed first in real world terms. You don't have people at parties, talking about screw marriage. I would never, ever trust a woman with all my assets and walk into the family courts. That's not party discourse in real world terms. But through social media, we have the opportunity to spread information and to talk about an alternative way for men to view their own lives in ways that we've never had before. It's why we have red pill movements, why we have MGTOW. It's why we've got a lot of things going on that would, there was like versions of MGTOW in the past, bachelors clubs and stuff like that. Very, very small portion of the population.
Very local.
Yeah, and nowadays it's worldwide, and it's amazing how many men actually do start rethinking their own lives when they start getting exposed to information that makes them see things that they've been trained to not see their whole lives. I think it has a great positive impact in that way. It's going to be rough and bloody at first. I think men need to. Honestly, we're seeing men now finally getting in touch with their anger about this lopsided deal that they've always had. And that sentiment is growing. There's going to be growing pains involved in that. We're talking about, we talked about the slowness of this before. Keep in mind that from Seneca Falls until women got voting rights was 70 years. And it was another 40, 50 years after that before gender feminism raised its ugly head in society. These things are like big lumbering ships. They're not like sports cars that turn on a dime and change directions. But it's happening. And I think it's happening on a bigger scale. It's why you see so much panic in the so-called conservative right about men who won't get married and who are challenging all this stuff. This is starting to scare people, which it ought to do.
Yeah, no, I would say too. I mean, like social media has turned dating into Twitter, and not just social media, but like these dating apps, Bumble and Tinder and Grindr and all of that stuff. I mean, even online dating, even internet dating is not what it was when I was doing it. When I met my husband, the one that just put coffee in the microwave. If I freeze up, that's why. It really has sort of cheapened the whole process of dating. But it's also, I think, woken a lot of men up to the fact that, you can be a reasonably attractive guy, a 6 or a 7. You can have a good income. You can have, be in a good place in your life. Like I own a condo and I work as a technician or an engineer or something like that. And I make $80K a year and I'm doing good and I'm debt free and all of that stuff, right? And swipe left, swipe left, swipe left, woman after woman, swipe left, because you're 5'10", you're not 6 feet tall, right? Or because you have a bit of a big nose, or you're not, you haven't. They'll only date 6 and 6, 6 feet, 6 figures, right? And that's it. So I think not just social media and the spreading of the word on social media, sort of the democratization of information that occurs through social media. It's not just that. It's men's experience of women's absolute pickiness and their unbelievably high standards. So you've got an overweight woman, right, who says, I won't date anyone less than 6 feet tall. And if the guy asks her, well, how much do you weigh?
They won't date fat guys either. I've interviewed these chicks.
Oh, I know. And, like I used to write smut for women, right? And there was a whole genre of smut for women called BBW, Big Beautiful Woman. And she was always Lizzo and he was always frickin' Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
I just to dovetail a little bit off of what Karen just said, the way I look at it is that on the other side of men getting better, more information and seeing women more clearly than they ever have, we have the negative effects of social media, dating apps, in that you have women's that are literally 3s and 4s who behave and act like they're 8s and 9s because of all the attention they get through dating apps. They misinterpret this flood of male attention, which is just how men are chasing women. They misinterpret that as making them more valuable than they are. I'm sure a lot of those women don't get any dates at all that are ever going to satisfy them.
Well, yeah,
Right.
well, they start to think they look like they're filters. It's like a weird phenomenon. No, I swear. So these girls will come on my show and I'm like, I'll be talking to them and sometimes I'll follow them on Instagram after and I'm like, who is this? Do you know what I mean? I'm like, or sometimes they'll take a picture like with me after the show and I don't really use filters like that, but it's like automatic when you take a picture. And I'm like, God damn, like this just gave me like 2 points. This is amazing. Like, I'm like, but they start to think they're actually that hot. With these filters, they like automatically make your nose a little smaller, your smile a little wider, your skin a little smoother. I'm like, I think these chicks like literally think they look like that.
Yeah, no, and I'm looking at myself right now, and it's like I haven't worn makeup in 10 years. And, there's this thing, it runs in my dad's family, where once you hit 50, what used to be flatteringly described as natural eyeshadow, because I never had to wear eyeshadow because I always had natural darker coloring on my eyelids. Right now, it just becomes raccoon eyes, and So I'm looking at myself, and I'm just like, well, what the fuck do I care? I'm 52 years old. I'm not on the market
now. These like you'll see these like Madonna 50-something-year-old chicks where it's like
yeah, stretch real tight. Yeah, no, they've had
that's so appealing.
Yeah, they've had 13 adjustments of their little cranks to like pull
and like 30 years
the leather face a little bit tighter.
Well, and they were trying to market Botox to me like in my early 20s. Like I had, and I'm like, what the fuck? What do I need Botox? I'm like 24. Like I'm 27 now almost. But back then I was 24. I'm like, you're ready? You want me to get on Botox? Like, what's that gonna look like in 20, 30 years? You're gonna be like frozen.
Yeah, never mind that the bow portion of Botox is botulism. It's all in the
tox part of Botox is toxin, botulism toxin.
What do you, I'm curious what you guys see for the future, because like for me, it's interesting because I have like ideas of policies that I think were bad. So like, I don't think women really should have voted. I'm not really a fan of no fault divorce, but part of me is like, I don't know if you can go back and maybe like there's ways they have to adapt into the future. So I don't know. I'm not actually sure exactly what policies I'd prescribe moving forward, except that women shouldn't vote. But I'm curious like what you guys think.
I don't know if my thoughts on that is, I don't focus so much on policy. I think men's solutions certainly aren't political or legal. I don't want to start building state-funded battered men's shelters or anything like that. But what I think has to happen in the future, and probably will happen, is that men and women will have to renegotiate a social contract at some point to something that is more fair. And I would also say, I think there's going to be a long time before that happens, where women find out what it's like to live in a population of men who are angry and don't give a shit about their problems. I think that's coming. We've got young men in high school now are staunchly anti-feminist and moving to the right. And yet they're not embracing traditional gynocentrism at all. When this generation of men, that generation comes of age, some women are going to get some very rude awakenings. And the sad part of it is, and I know some guys will tell me, Paul, it's not sad. It's sad to me, is that the women who are going to ultimately suffer for the sins of their mothers and grandmothers and great-grandmothers are not the ones who did this stuff. But they're still going to be the ones left in the lurch when men quit participating in this rigged game.
So you think that men are going to start walking away from marriage, walking away from relationships, walking away from children?
They've already started.
Yeah. No, I agree. I
mean, it's like that recent report came out. 63% of young men haven't even tried to go on a date in the last year. They're walking away, all right, and they're angry. You can't be brought up in a North American school system as a male and not have some repressed anger or some expressed anger out of that, because these guys have been shit on their whole academic lives. It is, and I agree with Karen. I think it'll have to collapse first. But the beginning of the collapse is when men, generally speaking, start withdrawing support from women. When they start taking care of themselves, everything is going to go to hell.
So
especially for women.
So with so I'm curious, like, what would a more fair contract look like, and what is the collapse going to look like?
Okay, well, a more fair contract, I think, would be something that could be negotiated between partners, right? Like, if I mean, like, my husband and I, we have a verbal, like a handshake deal, and we trust each other to hold up our ends of the bargain. And then if things get a little bit untenable for one of us, we will sit down at the bargaining table and see if we need to renegotiate. Right. And that's how we do things. And we actually kind of approach the relationship very similar to a contract. It is actually, this is what I agreed to do. That's what you agreed to do. So part of that might actually be introducing something that Muslims have been doing for ages, which is not the bride gift, but the actual contract, where you hash out exactly what's expected of each partner before you tie the knot. But honestly, I think that one of the things that you could do policy-wise that would really put a damper on women's willingness to throw away marriages is default shared parenting, right? Because, you can only read so many articles with titles like "The Agony of Being a 50-50 Mom," very sympathetic. Oh, these poor women, right? They might have missed their daughter's first steps or their son's first words because they were with their dad at the time, right? And, and she has to share custody 50% with her ex-husband. And it's just so horrible for these women. Well, yeah, if it's that horrible, let's freaking implement it. And maybe these women won't be so quick to throw away their husbands.
I personally, I think part of the negotiation is an individual thing. 25 years ago, I made the decision that, hey, if you're gainfully employed, you better find your fucking purse when the check arrives and carry your share, because I don't care if I had 10 million in the bank, I wouldn't finance a relationship with a woman. And there were times before I met my current partner that, I sprang for a couple of dinners so I could get sex. Okay, no problem. It wasn't well received in the end, but that's the game. I chose to play it better than they did. But for me, it starts with personal accountability financially. If you have to show up, bringing your labor, your sweat to the relationship in order to help build it, it gives you a better investment in it, and it doesn't end up with men getting used for their money. There's nothing that I hate more than to hear a woman complain, just because you bought me dinner doesn't mean you get to have sex. Well, then pay for your own fucking dinner.
Yeah.
Like that. If you don't want to hear that shit from men, pay your own way. And of course, if you insist that, now I went through probably 20 women before I met my partner, who, once they came up against that financial wall, decided they weren't so interested in me. And that was just fine with me, because I saved myself another divorce rape by going for a little bit better class of woman. If a woman expects to be able to make money and to pay her own bills and to have her own autonomy and independence in life, but not contribute to a relationship financially, she's a hoe.
Yep.
Do you think there'll ever be a return to traditionalism?
Yes.
Yeah, I do too.
33 trillion, 33.1 trillion in debt. It's not a whole lot better in Canada. My older two kids were born each with owing $38,000 in taxpayer debt. During COVID, that went up to more than $100,000 that all three of my kids owe to future creditors, to people collecting on those debts in the future. So, you're looking at the system that we've set up that basically it sticks an expensive, bloated, bureaucratic middleman in between men and women. So whereas a man and a woman would get together and they would bargain, they would decide between them how they wanted their relationship to work and who does what and all of those things, right? And they would get together, they would raise children. What we now have is a situation where you have this gigantic, bloated, money-hungry middleman taking a cut of every transfer of money that goes from men to women. I mean, like when you look at child support laws, Title 4D, basically what that did was it said, well, for every dollar of child support money a state child support agency can forcibly extract from a man, they will get $1 in federal transfers. So the state is basically, what the state does is they say, okay, well, we're going to pay for you to be on welfare and support your kids, but we don't want to pay the whole cost of that, right? So we're going to go after the father of these kids and extract every single penny of child support money we can from him. And we're going to deduct that off of your welfare check. So the children will be no better off, but we will, because then for every dollar we extracted from that man, we get another dollar from the federal government in grant money. Yay, federal transfers. Woo, we've doubled our money by nailing men to the wall and letting women do whatever the fuck they want. And nobody's better off. Everybody's worse off. And this whole system is only held together by the illusion of our great grandchildren's projected productivity. That's it. That's all that's holding it together. $33.1 trillion. That falls on the working people today and next generation and the next generation and the next one, right? To pay that back, or just let it keep ballooning. And once we can no longer afford to pay to sustain this system, and men and women have to go back to actually bargaining as individuals as to what they want their relationships to look like and work like and all of that, right? Then you're going to see some women willing to actually sit down at the negotiating table because they don't have that bureaucratic muscle standing behind them going, no, you're going to pay and you're going to pay what we tell you.
How long
right?
do you think it'll be till that happens? Till they stop like backing up women's bad decisions with child support, alimony, and government benefits?
I hope it's till the day after I die.
Yeah. Yeah, no, me too. Like I hope it when my kids die, if I don't have grandchildren, because like it's not going to be a pleasant transition. Women are going to be so used to getting all of this free stuff, and when you look at New Zealand and the numbers they came out with a few years ago, where they actually looked at the cumulative contribution into the tax system of men and women, right? From birth to death, right? And they found that the only people who actually pay taxes, who actually pay net taxes, are men between the ages of 40 and 65. That's when those are the only people who are actually contributing, putting in more than they take out. And they peak at 65 in terms of their net contribution, and that's when they retire. And then they start pulling out of the system, and by the time they're 80, they're at zero. They have made no net contribution. How do you sustain that, right? And women never get above negative $50,000.
Right.
And I don't think anybody can really predict with any kind of accuracy when it's going to happen. But I do believe that it will happen. And when it does, it's going to be incredibly fast and incredibly ugly. And then you will see the negotiations between men and women for the social contract are going to change radically after that collapse.
It'll be like,
it's going to be just like
the women like run to their friend zone.
I'll stay in camp. If you go hunt the zombie.
They're like, oh shit, all those years I put you in the friend zone. I don't know what I was thinking.
Yeah.
I was so silly.
I just didn't recognize how hot you were.
Yeah,
you're the Tom Hanks to my Meg Ryan.
You know what? You're like the hottest guy I've ever seen in my life. Ever. I just don't even.
Because you're the one who's willing to touch my vagina and protect me.
Thank you guys for coming on. The This is actually interesting because I've been thinking a lot about like what, the future holds with everything that's going on. So it's kind of interesting to talk to people that have had a little bit more time to think about this stuff. So thank you guys both for coming on. Could you tell the people where they could find you?
Okay, you can find me at paulelam.com, but more importantly, go to paulelam.com/XY crew and read up about what we're doing with our men's groups, talking about all of this stuff and figuring out how we're dealing with this through life. It's great stuff. You can join us there.
And you can find me on my channel, Girl Writes What, on YouTube. It's fairly defunct, but it has like a massive hours and hours and hours of back catalog that could easily serve. And I was actually learning when I was doing those. So, I mean, it would be like a great primer for anybody who's interested in any of these things to kind of go back and watch those videos in order. And you can also find me on the site formerly known as Twitter, under @girlwriteswhat. And I also have a blog that I rarely post on, but occasionally do, called owningyourshit.blogspot.com. You can go there, and I have a very recent post that details all the reasons why.
Yeah.
Also, please come follow me on Twitter at Real Paul Elam.
Yeah.
At Real Paul Elam.
Yeah, he's
Yes.
always
But
he's
I'm
always
not
I
at
have the
Real
blue
Girl
check
Writes What.
mark, I'll have you know.
Yeah.
Oh,
He's always atting these simps too. It's awesome. I'm always retweeting. We went at
Yeah,
the Daily Wire
no,
this weekend. It was awesome. I was like, this is amazing. I went from watching these guys to tweeting at them, and they're recognizing me. I'm like, what a day.
yeah, no, the Simps really need to be saved.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They need to be rescued from themselves.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and it's also like, oh my gosh, once you can't unsee it, like the nagging wife. So it's like you can kind of see who's like controlled by their wives based on like the things they say, or like, because they were all mad. The Daily Wire was mad a couple months ago because I put "let me ask my wife" with a barfing emoji next to it.
They are easily triggered over
they're
there.
like, well, what if she's my assistant? And I'm like, I mean, I have an assistant. I certainly don't ask her like I tell her what I'm doing. I don't ask her. You know what I mean? Like I might ask like, what's the schedule this week? But I'm not asking permission.
Yeah.
I'm like,
You'd make a lousy simp.
Yeah, I know. Okay, guys, make sure you go follow, subscribe to both of them, and get yourself a Women Shouldn't Vote t-shirt today. Look, these women, we've just gotten out of control. You know, I might even make a Simps Shouldn't Vote t-shirt either. I know you guys, I've heard you. It's not just women, okay? But it's got to start with the women, because it's just, I don't even understand these campaigns. We just believe anything. You see the clothes they convince us to wear? Like, this is crazy, all right? All right, so like the video, guys, subscribe to the channel. Thank you guys for coming on, and I'll talk to you next time.